All right, as we continue to crank out the early signing period coverage here at Mark Rogers TV, we move it out to the Pac-12 and the West Coast with UCLA and Tony Siracusa, who joins us from Last Word on College Football, who does such an exceptional job covering UCLA, the Pac-12, and the nation. He and the rest of the staff there, you got to join them on Last Word on College Football. Tony and I were just kicking it around. Tony explaining to me how much coverage that they delivered specifically yesterday with signing day. So give us a feel for what people can find before we get started on this UCLA class, Tony.
Yeah, sure, Mark. Good to be with you. It was a crazy day. I think a lot of people at any level across the country, no matter how much you follow college football, did not know what to expect yesterday. It was the first ever early signing period for reasons that the NCAA felt would be appropriate. They had a 3-day period in December. But yesterday was when the rubber met the road. It was insane. We had stories ready across the country for the teams that we cover, across the college football landscape, guys that we were confident were going to sign, people we knew were going to sign. Their player profiles were ready. The signing stories were ready. And we went through, in one day, we went through 45 stories on our site on guys signing their letters yesterday. We were joking last night. I was kind of like the air traffic controller of the system, looking at what we had in queue and who was ready and getting notes from people all around the country. Hey, this kid just signed. All right, you go into the system, you hit publish on that kid's story. I was hitting the first publish button at 4:15 West Coast time yesterday when a couple of kids from Florida signed at 7:15 their time, and it went on all afternoon. There were kids at UCLA who were signing last night at about 6:30 West Coast time last night. So it was a good 15-16 hour day of just controlled pandemonium.
All right, we're talking UCLA football with Tony Siracusa from Last Word on College Football as the Bruins bring in the beginning of its recruiting class for 2018 under Chip Kelly. Tony, the first thing that strikes me, and you can certainly correct me if I'm headed in the wrong direction, let's liken and make the comparison between Chip Kelly starting at UCLA versus Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee. And even though Kelly had several days more time than Jeremy Pruitt knows the landscape of the SEC. Kelly's been out of the college game and been a commentator and been in the pro ranks for a number of years. And so he comes into a different footprint to a certain extent, although obviously he recruited California extensively at Oregon. So I think that considering the current rank, and I know there's a lot to do here because the numbers haven't filled out yet, at number 33 in the nation and number 4 in the Pac-12, according to 247 Sports, Chip Kelly has done a decent job to start here.
I think you hit it right. I think it's the start, and I think that's what UCLA fans need to remember. Kelly hasn't recruited the college game in 6 years. And while he recruited Southern California very well when he was the head coach at Oregon, it's been a few years. His relationship with the high school coaches has been, put on the shelves for all that time. And there was a lot of reestablishment that needed to be done. You also have to look into the fact that Kelly is going to run a distinctively different offense, a distinctively different game plan than what Jim Mora had been running at UCLA. And so the change in philosophy was something that was going to alter the way you look at the players that you have. There was a player who wound up signing with Cal yesterday simply because in the last week he and Kelly decided that they weren't the best fit for each other. It was really even a mutual departure. This kid Aaron Maldonado, who was a defensive lineman, 3-star defensive line recruit. So those things happen. When you look at it in terms of what Kelly did get, you're right. The numbers are not there. He signed 8 players last night. The quality is there. He got some really outstanding talent this week and had a couple of late flips during the week that he got from other schools. And so I think when you look at those things, it's the beginning. I think if you want to look across the entire national landscape, you look at a school like Miami or a school like Florida. These guys signed 15, 16, 17 kids yesterday. They signed most of their class already. Kelly is still going to have some work to do between now and what is, I guess, now the second signing day, that first Wednesday in February, which has always been the traditional National Letter of Intent Day. He's got some work to do. He's got to sign some more players between now and then, because while he got a lot of talent, there are a few holes still out there that need to be filled.
I've heard as much as 65% of the players have signed already. And I would say for the top programs, that's a much higher rate, as they generally have their pick of the litter. And I think that's the number one reason why. So I was surprised to open up UCLA's tote board. And even though the quality is very impressive with 4 stars, 4 4-stars out of the 8 signees, there's a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah, and in terms of the percentage, what I heard was the raw numbers, and it probably correlates the same, that there were approximately 1,700 kids who signed their letters of intent yesterday, which means that the talent pool still available for that February signing day is much smaller. But I think if you're UCLA and you want to be optimistic about the new Chip Kelly regime, I think what you're going to say is we may not even fill the 25 spots that we have available to us. But we got some huge talent. We filled some positions of need. And now what's going to be left is to fill some other spots where we didn't really get what we wanted. Frankly, Mora didn't have them either in some of those positions. And so now we're going to fill in some holes. But in terms of the overall talent, UCLA did really well. You know, they got a kid, one of the big stories of the week for them is this kid, Bo Calvert, who is an outside linebacker from Mission Viejo, a 4-star recruit. And what made him a big story is he had been a USC commit all along. And Monday night, 48 hours before the start of early signing, he flipped over to UCLA. And part of his story was that Chip Kelly called him within the first couple of days after Kelly got the UCLA job. And then Don Pelham, the new linebackers coach, called him the day he got the job. And he was impressed by that. He had, they had some meetings, things worked out well. His answer about why he chose UCLA was interesting. And I'm going to read this because I want to make sure I get it verbatim, because it was highly unusual, for an 18-year-old kid to say this. So I'm going to read it directly. He said, "I connected with Coach Kelly and Coach Pelham on a physiological and spiritual level. I share some of their same ideals and style of competing that they have. I want to study anatomy and physiology and go to medical school. So overall, UCLA just felt like it was the right place for me to play and graduate from." You don't hear a lot of recruits talking about a physiological and spiritual connection with their coaches. So that one definitely stuck out, no question.
Wouldn't you have loved to have heard that conversation?
Right? Yeah, I want to know what it was, because Chip Kelly is a quirky dude. There is no question about it. I want to hear how you connect with him on a physiological and spiritual level. But they did get, again, the kids that they did get, they got this kid who signed last night, Brian Addison, who is rated as the #1 athlete in the country on a lot of services. And this was, for those who don't follow it as day in and day out as you and I do, you're regarded as an athlete if you play 2 positions pretty much equally. And so he's a wide receiver and defensive back, started in both positions. For Sarah Gardina, what makes that notable for UCLA people is that for decades, Sarah has been a pipeline to USC. And so for the #1 athlete in the country and to commit, and for it to be a kid from Sarah High School was significant. He'll probably start in the defensive backfield to begin with. He'll work his way into the offense in time. UCLA loses 2 defensive backs off last year or this year's team. See, I'm already talking next year, with the recruits, but they lose 2 starters, or they lose 1 starter and 1 regular, Mossy Johnson and Jaleel Wadu off the 2017 roster. So he's got a chance to see some action right away. I mean, the kid's 6'5", 180, so he's big and lanky for a defensive back, which should give him some real work against some of the bigger, taller wide receivers in the Pac-12.
Tony, with this early signing period, everybody's scrambling, but especially those new coaches that are taking over. And then have different levels of involvement. We've seen different plans and approaches to the postseason play and the bowl game for these different coaches. But one thing that hits me right in the face in looking at this list of players is that everybody's from California. So there has to be an advantage to being at UCLA versus being at Nebraska. That comes to mind, obviously, with the coaching transition there, or if Kansas State was turning over a coach where you're kind of needing to go long distances to bring in talent versus being at UCLA and you've got the best talent in America, arguably right at your back doorstep.
We're 4 days before Christmas and it's 75 degrees out here and sunny. It's not that hard to recruit the area right now. They lost a wide receiver who, to your point, stayed home. Jahan Dotson was a 4-star wide receiver, and he had been a long-time commit to UCLA. And yesterday, he signed with Penn State, which is where he's from, Eastern Pennsylvania. And so they lost a couple players. They lost some recruits when Mora was fired. Some kids just didn't want to wait, didn't want to see what they were going to get from Chip Kelly. When you have assistant coaches being replaced, of course, those are the links that most of these kids have to the program, because it's the assistants that put all that time and effort in for a year and a half, 2 years. And with some of them being replaced, they lost about 8 players over a 3 to 4 week period. But they've got these guys that they did sign. Now there are some kids who they know they're getting, by the way, who just haven't signed yet. They know they're getting Dorian Thompson-Robinson, the quarterback from Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas. He hasn't signed yet, hasn't made any comments about why he hasn't signed. Nobody is concerned that he's not coming. The kid has been one of the biggest recruiters for UCLA since he committed. As everybody on social media knows him, DTR, because it's a lot easier than Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and he goes by DTR on his social media accounts. He has been cheering, the Chip Kelly hire since the day it happened. And he has been, you can see his Twitter feed reaching out to other players. So, they know they're getting him. And that's one of the best. He's the number 3 dual threat quarterback in the country. So they know that that's still there. They're also getting this. They're also getting some other kids who, they know that they've committed and they know that they're coming and they haven't signed yet. One of them is Elijah Griffin, who is a 4-star cornerback from Mission Viejo. And he was honest. He said, look, it's my only recruiting that I'm ever going to have in my life. I want to take some of these trips. I'm not a big fan of milking schools for the trips, but, he has assured UCLA fans it means nothing in his recruitment. It's funny because UCLA wants to make sure they get him because it will continue their musical legacy. Because, of course, they had Justin Combs, the son of P. Diddy or Puff Daddy or whatever he's going to go by this year. They had him for 4 years as a backup defensive back. They had Snoop Dogg's son for about 2 or 3 weeks before he decided he didn't want to play football anymore. And Elijah Warren is the son of rapper Warren G. And so, got to continue that musical legacy here in LA.
I don't have a whole lot to add to that. I can't even give you some kind of a clever pun of any particular lyric or song.
It's old school rap. It's old school rap.
Way out of my genre.